Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's free webinar, Marketing for Startups, Building a Killer Marketing Program with Peter Mansfield from CMO.LA. My name is Erica Malsberg, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Early Growth Financial Services, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's discussion. We have a lot of content here. Peter put together a really great presentation for you guys. So it's going to run, I'd say, at least 50 minutes. So we're going to kind of just run through it. But if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to enter them in the question field. Or you can also tweet them to us at earlygrowthfs and at ManSF with the hashtag startup marketing. We'll do our best to answer the questions as they come in if we can, or we're also going to try and save some time at the end for a short Q&A to address them. If we do run out of time and don't get to all your questions, we will be sure to follow up. We'll either answer them through Twitter, or Peter will send you individual emails after the presentation, or even set up some follow-up calls with you to make sure that your questions have been answered. We're also recording today's session, and we'll be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow that will have a link to this recording and to the deck, so you'll have that for your reference. Before I hand it off to Peter to run the show, I just want to say a few quick words about Early Growth. We're an outsourced financial services firm that provides day-to-day accounting, CFO, tax, and valuation services and support to small to mid-sized companies across the United States and even beyond. We currently have a footprint in 9 markets from Silicon Valley to New York City, and we support 10 to 15% of the venture-backed companies in the US, with an impressive client list that includes companies such as TechShop, Indiegogo, Zendesk, Clout, RocketSpace, OpenERP, and over 500 plus more companies nationwide. So enough about us. I'd like to move on to our guest of honor today, and that would be Peter Mansfield. Peter's a strategic consultant who helps fast growth companies with all aspects of their marketing and communications, including helping entrepreneurs build relationships with investors. He's helped hundreds of startups and later stage companies raise rounds and go through IPOs and acquisitions worth close to $5 billion. Peter was born in the UK, hence his Downton Abbey accent, but he now lives in Southern California. His current clients include Billfloat, Marqeta, Pertino Networks, Revolution Credit, and Wallaby Financial. So good morning and welcome to you, Peter.
Hey, thank you so much, Erica. And just to put in another good word for Early Growth. Early Growth's not only been a great partner for my company, but also for a lot of my clients. We've always had a great experience. And we've been working with Erica and her team and David and the entire Early Growth team now probably for about 4 or 5 years, ever since LA really started to sort of develop its own startup scene. So I just want to put in a good word for Early Growth, and thank you all for attending, and thank Early Growth for giving me the opportunity to chat with you today.
Of course. So happy to have you here. So I'm going to just step back and let you jump in, and I'm just going to interrupt if we have some questions coming in from the audience. So it's your show, Peter.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, the goal of the session is to try and give you the tools and processes to build a marketing program. And along the way, there's also some tips on avoiding some very common mistakes that we see time after time. But a couple of disclaimers first. It's pretty much impossible to do anything other than sort of skim the surfaces of all the things that you could be doing marketing-wise over the course of just a pretty short webinar. Plus, a lot of you we focus on business-to-business opportunities. Some of you are B2C. So each company has different target audiences that really require their own marketing approach. But what I'm hoping we can do is at least start the dialogue and sort of point you in the right direction and give you the ground rules to build a viable growth marketing program. And one of the things that I've done on previous webinars with Early Growth is to offer everybody that's on the webinar a one-on-one session afterwards. That's usually over the phone. In some cases, if you're local or if I'm around, we can do that in person. But it does give you the chance to obviously get a much more sort of customized, personalized approach to how to your market opportunity.
Peter, I'm just going to jump in real quick. I'm sorry, your sound quality suddenly is a little bit hard to hear you. I'm not sure if you could ask someone on your team to help you with that, or ask for their confirmation. You're cutting in and out.
Okay. Yeah, I'll keep on going here. Okay. And let me know if that sounds any better or any worse, or sometimes my accent confuses the issue as well. Hopefully the slides as well, or sort of talk more eloquently than I can anyway. But just pipe in by sending a text message if anyone's having a tough time on the chat or in hearing me.
Okay, thank you.
So just a very quick intro about me. Actually, Erica covered all the most basic points here, so I'll skip through this pretty fast. I started my company in 1992, still going strong. I've been through multiple waves of sort of startup frenziness, and along the ways I've built up a pretty good portfolio of companies that have been acquired, gone through IPOs and all sorts of different exit strategies. Well over 100 companies at this point and counting. Not all of them have exited, obviously, but I've worked with a good number of startups. And along the ways as well, I also help companies with fundraising just by virtue of having, built a pretty good network of VCs and angels that I've worked with over the years. Erica, that sounding any better?
It doesn't to me, but I have a few helpful people in the audience who said that it sounds okay to them. So maybe there's just something weird with my. But people keep responding back. If you're not hearing Peter so well, we can try something else. But it sounds like everyone's having a better listening experience than me. So go for it.
Yeah, don't take it personally.
Okay.
So as far as the ways that I sort of work with fast growth startup companies, it's kind of a mixture. In some cases, I just sort of serve as a mentor. There's a lot of incubators and accelerators down here that I team up with and help their portfolio companies as sort of, just giving them general advice, pointing them in the right direction. In other cases, I sort of come in as sort of the classic consultant and just helping as an advisor to just help the startup. Most typically, I kind of work as sort of a chief marketing officer in a box, if you like, and I have a small team of people that helps me with that. So we sort of become like a marketing department as an extension of the startup company's team. And in some cases, I can get involved as a co-founder. So it's a kind of a wide range of different levels of involvement. And one of the things that, from having been in the business for quite a while, it is that there was sort of, it used to be a lot simpler about 20 years ago. Really, my job was to sort of help support sales marketing-wise with some sort of tried and tested tactics. Advertising, did some PR, did some trade shows, did some promotions and some collateral, and that was pretty much a considered a well-rounded marketing program. And things have changed quite a lot. Today we're confronted with this really complex and rapidly evolving set of moving parts, and it can be really overwhelming. But on the other hand, if you know what you're doing, it also presents a really good opportunity to engage much more effectively with your target audiences. But you can see on this kind of graphic here all the different potential channels and avenues and advertising approaches that you could take to reach out to different audiences. So faced with that, how do you respond? And the first thing that we normally try to do with each of our clients is to help them put the people and processes in place. In some cases, we are the people. We're the people that sort of help them build their marketing program. In other cases, we just help them find people. We sort of switch to recruitment mode. But it's really sort of, kind of getting prepared for war. And if you look at the sort of wide range of different areas that marketing covers now, these are probably, at the risk of over-categorizing things, these are probably the biggest ones that we sort of, work all the time. There's branding, social media, public relations, website, blog, content marketing, inbound marketing, paid search, SEM, SEO, app store optimization, user testing, UX, UI stuff, biz dev support, events, conferences, investor relations. And not every company on this call needs every single one of these to be operating, at maximum pace all the time. But the chances are you're going to have probably a fair few of these boxes that need to be covered. And that can be really challenging. In some cases, if you're early stage, you may well be handling the marketing yourself as a co-founder, or you may have a dedicated person, or it could be outside help from someone like me. Either way, whoever it is that's helping you needs to have most of the following characteristics. And I think it's good to sort of think through this because it's easy to either make a hiring mistake or easy to make a mistake in how you build out your team. And particularly in marketing, I think you need someone that, covers each of these different areas. They need to be pretty entrepreneurial. The best startup marketers are usually kind of pragmatic risk takers. So they're going to look at the opportunity and say, okay, well, we need a certain amount of time, a certain amount of money that we can dedicate to our opportunity. How can we be sensible about this? How can we look at the different alternatives? But at the same point as well, how can we really optimize an opportunity when it comes along? I think they need to be both creative and relentless, and those two things don't always sit together, but you need to really have someone that can figure out a practical way of driving growth for your organization. They need to be really disciplined, which again, alongside creative, is not always the best match. It's sometimes to find people that are both creative and disciplined, but really a good marketing person is going to follow a process of a pretty well-defined process of prioritizing ideas. They need to be collaborative, so they need to have the ability to sort of act as the glue in some cases between different areas of your business, sales, customer support, product development, and they also need to be balanced. And this is sort of a general statement, I guess, for pretty much anyone on your team. You know, their ego needs to take a backseat to the company goals, and of course, marketing and ego often go hand in hand as well. So these are some of the characteristics that we've seen in the best marketing people, and it's probably worth bearing this in mind as you look to bring on your team, or even look at your own set to understand whether you've got the right kind of balance to really make a go of it. So mistake number one on the big three here. We've seen a lot of companies that really overload on strategic help or dedicate a lot of time to strategic at the expense of the tactical side of the house. And in my experience, you know, one of the biggest lessons I've learned from seeing startups both succeed and fail is that most startups are usually in pretty good shape when it comes to the vision and the strategy and what they want to be when they grow up. Where many of the startups fall down is when it comes to implementation, and digging in at a tactical level to execute on a market opportunity becomes really challenging. And a big part of that actually is just not being organized, and that's one of the things again that, you know, we strongly encourage all of our clients to spend some time up front in thinking through the right tool set that their people can use, and how to make it easier to collaborate. At some point or another, I think we tried virtually all the marketing, project management, and communication tools. The ones that we currently use are Glip, which is sort of a good alternative to Slack for instant messaging within a company and with our clients. It also handles our to-do list. We use Podio for project management, which is a really slick, very customizable project management tool. And we use Smartsheet for timeline management. And again, pretty much all of these are shareable with our clients. Some of our clients use things like Asana, particularly, you know, dev-heavy app developers, those kinds of companies where Asana tends to be a really popular tool. But you know, along the ways, the three that we seem to use the most here at this end: Smartsheet, Glip, and Podio. I'm happy to pass on any feedback on any other tools that people are considering as well.
Can you, people are saying you're a little bit broken up. Would you mind spelling out the names of those tools that you use?
Yeah, let me go back to that slide. Yeah, the instant messaging tool that we use for both that and also for our to-do list is Glip. That's G-L-I-P. The project management tool that we use is Podio, which is P-O-D-I-O, and Smartsheet is the timeline management tool. Smartsheet, I'll spare you the spelling on that one, but those are the three primary ones that we use. And then, you know, you can see on the slide there, the background there is Asana, which is a very popular tool for, you know, a lot of developers love it. It's a lot more granular, and, you know, it's got that sort of development look to it. It's not my favorite personally, but I do know a lot of companies that use it and love it, particularly if they're, you know, doing development sprints and that kind of thing.
Perfect, thanks. And you know what, in our follow-up email, I'll just include the list of these as well, just in case, so that people can have those for reference. Thanks.
Yeah, that sounds good. And there's some other tools as well that as we're going through, we can get your links to pretty much everything that we mentioned today, and give you, you know, more tips and advice, and also in some cases connect you with you know, the companies themselves if you're interested in, you know, trying them out.
Great.
One of the other things that we do, this is a far from glamorous aspect of things, so I'm really down in the tactical trenches here now, is another point on organization. It never ceases to amaze me just how much time startups end up wasting just trying to find assets like things like the latest versions of their logo, where the latest PowerPoint deck is. So one of the things we sort of insist on now is that we drop into place a really easily shareable asset library. That's typically on Dropbox or Box.net or on Google Drive. And we just follow some very obvious and practical and pragmatic kind of titles for each of the folders within there. We try and keep one person in charge of that to make sure that things don't get out of hand. But I know it sounds really simple and obvious, but it can really save a lot of time and save a lot of heartache. So it's a like I say, something that we try to emphasize on a base level with each of our clients. So assuming that you've managed to get yourself organized and you've got a good platform there to start building out your marketing, it's probably a good time to start getting serious about your brand. And the goal here is really to develop a credible and distinctive platform that encourages engagement with the target audiences. And some of the starting points here is, building a brand is not just about creating a cool-looking logo. That definitely helps, but it goes a lot further than that. It's really sort of creating a top-down definition of the purpose of your company. And in the next slide, I'll show you a good tool for helping do that. It's really sort of looking at every touch point that you have with your customers and your target audiences, because that's how your brand is going to be recognized and how it's going to be defined and liked or disliked. And it comes down to things like the organizational culture and behavior. How do your people interact with internally and with each of their target audience members? And one of the things we always emphasize is branding, that there is a real need for some objectivity for most companies. So don't just rely solely on your in-house branding. At the very least, keep people, keep your ear to the ground as far as understanding what people think of your brand. And that requires, like I say, in some cases outside consultants to help you. It could just be as simple as, having a regular process or advisors that can help you in understanding what the market is saying about your brand. And then also measure for success. And as we're going through the deck today, we'll talk a little bit more about that relative to things like user acquisition. But there are ways that you can also test the effectiveness and how your brand is coming over as well. I just mentioned a really good tool for helping you sort of define what your brand is all about. I'm not necessarily a big TED Talk guy, but I strongly encourage everyone to watch this particular TED Talk. It's called The Golden Circle by a guy called Simon Sinek, and it was done a few years back, but it is I think it's about 15 or 20 minutes long. It's a really excellent definition of what really distinguishes top brands. And the one that I've used here as an example is a classic one that everyone uses, but it's worth revisiting, which is Apple. In the Golden Circle talk, he defines the core aspect of each organization, which is why you're there. And in Apple's case, it's, Apple believes in challenging the status quo and doing things differently. It doesn't say anything at all about the types of products that they make or, the marketplaces that they're in. It's just really the why they're there as a company. What is it that really the core things motivates them and keeps them going and keeps them makes them successful. When you take it up from the next level from there, it's how do they go ahead and achieve that mission. And in Apple's case, it's by creating products that are beautifully designed and easy to use. And then the last element of this is the what, and that's often the starting point for most companies. So this reverses the process to some extent, but it's a really good exercise to go through. The what is the products. Could be products like the iPhone. But in a lot of other cases, you find companies, it could be, if you look at companies like Dell, for instance, there's nowhere near as clear a definition of the why. They start with their products, and their products initially were successful because they had an alternative channel for selling them. But there wasn't really sort of this cultural aspect or this sort of understanding of why Dell was in existence. And some companies like Apple have done a particularly good job of it. So I think it's a really good weekend exercise to kind of go down and watch this video. Alongside this, mistake number two that we see is that a lot of folks that we work with think that branding starts and ends with a cool logo. As we've just mentioned, it kind of goes a lot further than that. We could give you dozens and dozens of examples of good and bad, branding, well brand and poor brand companies, but for the sake of time, we've gone ahead and included a link here to a really excellent blog post from HubSpot. HubSpot has a lot of excellent resources to help get up to speed on all aspects of marketing, but this one focuses in on 10 brands that have really differentiated themselves well. I put some examples up there. There's Lush, the cosmetics company. There's Zendesk, which some of you may be using for customer support, and then there's our friends at Whole Foods. And it gives you sort of just a quick overview of how those companies have differentiated themselves and what that means in the marketplace. So the link is down there for the article. So, again, I strongly encourage you, if you are interested in looking at other examples, to go and check that article out. So enough about brand. The next big area, and it's usually the one common denominator for all of the marketing programs that we work on for our clients, is user acquisition. And this is, obviously close to most startups' hearts. It's how you get customers or users in the door. The first thing we always emphasize is you've got to know who those customers are. And whether it's a B2B market or whether it's a B2C marketplace that you're focused on, you need to kind of think through at a pretty good level what those people are and what motivates them, what gender, what age, income, geography. You can see the whole list here. What levels of intelligence they have, how they like to entertain themselves, what kind of pets they have. Build a really good persona or profile up. And again, tools like HubSpot have a really good sort of structured approach to help you down that track. And by building those personas and profiles within some of those marketing software applications like HubSpot, you can then start to segment your target audience and reach out to them with very well-defined messages. But initially, before you get to that point, before you try and do anything user acquisition-wise, make sure you know who those people are. Once you've got a pretty good sense, at least an entry-level sense for your target audiences and what makes them tick, it's good to start to define the funnel. The funnel is really sort of the life cycle that you have from a prospect through to a customer. At the top end of the funnel, you're trying to feed in potential customers and take them through a nicely defined process. And then turn them into loyal, profitable customers at the other end of the process. So we'll take a look at ways of feeding the funnel in a moment. But first, the stages. I'll take you through the stages in a typical startup funnel. This one is actually courtesy of Kissmetrics, who are another great resource alongside HubSpot for information, in this case on funnel testing and analytics. At the top end of the funnel, the first stage is really acquisition. How the users find you. Assuming that you start to feed some leads in, and we'll walk through some of the ways of doing that in the next slide. Assuming you started to feed some names in, it's important at that point that you activate them effectively. So in other words, the users have a great first experience. That could be as simple as an onboarding process in an app. Or it could be a more extensive process if you're a B2B focused organization or startup where you are building much more deeper relationships. Once you've activated a client, got them up and running on your platform or on your app, next stage is how do you keep them coming back, retention. Through from there, joined at the hip to that is revenue. How do you make money from those customers now that they're on board and you've given them a reason to keep coming back? And then finally, ideally, you want to turn those customers into your biggest advocates. To the point where they may become a referral source for you. So do your customers tell other people and encourage them to join in the party.
Before you move on here, we have a couple of questions for you, Peter. So one is coming from Tina, and she wants to know if you can speak a little bit more to good methods for user acquisition with an app. How do you find and test these and grow your users with an app?
Yeah, right. Well, Tina, you preempted me actually, because the next slide is sort of mostly focused on app developers, just because in my experience on the webinars that I've done over the last year or two, the lion's share of companies seem to be app developers. So I sort of gently start to focus in on that a little more than any other area.
Yeah.
So if you could just bear with me, I'll go down to the next slide. But could you say there was one other question as well?
Why don't we go ahead and move on to answer Tina's question, and I can jump in with the other one. Sure.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, so Tina, if you sort of work on the assumption that virtually all of the stuff on this slide is for you, and then for everyone else on the call, the chances are it's probably most of these are probably going to be applicable as well. When we do the one-on-one sessions is where we sort of dig in a lot more and get a sense that if the startup has tried any of the techniques and how they've tested it. But so this is a somewhat generic sort of overview of what it takes to feed the funnel. And so it's a sort of the classic set of typical approaches. There's SEO, SEM, paid search is one classic example. And in some cases, companies use it to test their messaging. In other cases, it becomes the lion's share of their effort to bring users on board. So online ads, paid search. App store optimization is becoming an increasingly critical element for app developers. Making sure that you're well placed, well reviewed, and you've got a smart exposure within Google Play and within the Apple Store is really critical. And this is sort of a relatively new science. In comparison to virtually everything else on this slide, all the other elements, the tools that are available are still kind of relatively elementary as far as what you can do to really, optimize your App Store presence. I won't dig too far into this, but there are tools like Fixu that is inexpensive, but proving to be a relatively effective way to sort of, drive traffic through the app stores and drive positive reviews in the app stores. But Apple and Google are both very careful about trying to provide a relatively level playing field. There are some, Apple in particular keeps an extremely tight hold on the methodologies that you can use to sort of game the system. They change their algorithms constantly, and they also have, a vested interest in a lot of cases in providing a more comfortable environment for apps that are Apple-centric, let's just say. I won't go into the politics of it. I've been an Apple user since the 80s, so I'm a tad biased, but it starts to get complex and probably beyond the scope of this webinar. Once you get into the sort of the politics and science of App Store optimization, but that is a key area. So Tina, that's definitely one to focus in on. I've got lots of good articles that can help you out and lots of good advice for that as well if you want to follow up afterwards. Some of the other kind of traditional approaches of feeding the funnel: email marketing, social media, content marketing, always a good one to be sort of a cornerstone element. Affiliate marketing, where you're driving leads by essentially, either putting in a rev share or a paid component to bringing those leads over from another side. Public relations, partner marketing. And partner marketing is actually an area that we're going to dig into a little more further into the presentation. This is a sort of classic.
Sorry, I was going to say, before we move on, we have a question here from Lori, yep. And this may be better served by a follow-up conversation offline, but she wants to know if you could talk a little bit about each of these tools and how effective they are. In particular, she wanted to focus on social media, but I imagine it would depend on what your product or service was, or what kind of company you are. But can you sort of highlight what are some of these generally more effective than others? Do they need to be used in tandem? Do you kind of need to hit all of those, or do you have sort of an overview of the effectiveness of these tools?
Yeah, it does vary such a lot between B2B and B2C, probably more so in social media, just because of the diversity of the different social channels than virtually anything else. I mean, email marketing in most cases is going to work if you've got a good target audience and they've opted in, then that's always going to be effective regardless of the audience. But, social channels tend to be very they're evolving quickly themselves, and we're still learning which are the most effective for different types of opportunities. I mean, one thing we found is that Twitter is a great tool for certain types of things, but it's horrible for generating leads. So we've got some sort of general advice that we can provide, but it's probably best to sort of take that one offline and look at a particular market opportunity and say, okay, well, it seems like given the demographics and the sort of profile of the audience that you're going after, these channels would make the most sense from a social standpoint.
Sure. Okay, so Lori, I will connect you with Peter after the presentation so he can follow up. But this kind of brings us back also to the other question, which maybe should be taken offline as well. But you kind of
Yeah.
alluded to the differences in approach for B2B versus B2C. Again, sort of looking at this grid here, can you highlight the ones that may be most effective with B2B and those that are more effective with B2C, or the ones that are across the board most effective?
Oh man, that's a good one.
That
Um,
comes to you from Yana, by the way.
Yana. No, that's a really good one. I mean, I think, some of the ones that tend to be effective across the board are public relations. I mean, it's very rare that a really good article and a really good blog or in a really good spot, is ever going to be anything other than positive, regardless of the type of audience that you've got. I think content marketing is always a great thing to do because it forces you to think about the user that's going to be receiving it and put yourself in their position, and it gives you a lot of ammunition to use in these other areas. Content marketing leads you into using social channels to market that content that you've created. I think, clearly App Store optimization is one that is really focused in on B2C primarily. I mean, there are B2B tools that are offered through the app stores, but, that's really a battleground mostly for consumers. So, that's one that's probably a little out there, more isolated on one side of the house. I'd say that pretty much everything else here on the chart is going to be relevant for either side. So I hope I'm not sounding evasive or confused or indecisive, but it does vary such a lot. And, to be honest, it changes from day to day as well. Some
Right.
channels focus themselves a little better day to day than others and change their focus. So.
Right. No, and I think you're right. And I mean, I'm learning things from this presentation as well, which I really appreciate. And I mean, I find this too, it's what your particular goal is, right? Like if you are trying to, build your brand, some of these might work better. If you're trying to generate leads, others might work better. So it's really up to the individual to figure out what you're trying to do and then find the tool that fits your need.
Yeah, that's a very good point as well, actually. It isn't just a factor of the target audience that you focus on, it's also where you're at as a company. I mean, if you're already some ways down the track and you've already got like 1 million signed up users for a consumer-focused, application or something like that for an app, then, email marketing or just all the sort of engagement tools that you can use probably start to really take precedence over a lot of other things just because you want to keep hold of that initial customer base and leverage them as much as you can. But for a company that's, starting from scratch and they're just trying to build their first, maybe they're just in beta and they're just trying to get sort of their initial beta audience going for an MVP, it's a whole different scenario. So yeah, so again, I apologize if I'm not giving too much of a definitive answer.
No, I think that's very helpful. And we're still taking questions. If anyone has follow-up questions, feel free to enter them in. Otherwise, we'll let you move on from this slide.
Sounds good. Yeah, I hope it's not coming up like one of those action movies where they leave you in the last frame knowing there's going to be a sequel. But anyway, I'll move on.
Okay.
So mistake number 3 is trying to be everywhere. It's just impossible. I mean, even the biggest of the big guys with hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on marketing and roomfuls of bright young things that are doing nothing else other than marketing, it's impossible to try and be everywhere at once. So, and this really lays a lot of emphasis on the need to go ahead and test each dollar that you spend and each level of activity that you put in place. And as far as testing is concerned, the sort of the notion of the metrics that you want to use to test how effective your user acquisition program is, those have sort of started to evolve pretty rapidly as well. So it used to be that, people would brag about how many registered users, downloads, page views they had. I think the metrics, and this comes into the fundraising scenario as well. When you're sitting down with an angel or a VC, the good ones are going to ask you about the number of engaged users that you have, repeat versus first-time actions. In other words, do people just download the app once and never use it again, or are they coming back and using it on a constant basis? Because for an app developer like Tina, repeat usage is critical. You want to get people into the habit of using your app as much as they possibly can, and that also includes things like time between actions, repeat action probability, customer lifetime value, and customer acquisition costs. These are critical elements that investors are going to ask you about, and you're going to want to know anyway. And these are, again, sort of app developer friendly kind of metrics. May not be quite as applicable for other marketplaces, but I won't bore you with the nuances there on this. So these are some of the key metrics to kind of bear in mind. One other key aspect on user acquisition is to make sure you've got a good back end in place. So this slide could just as easily have been actually earlier in the presentation when we were talking about organization. But there's sort of two real areas here that are important. There's your CRM or Salesforce automation types of tools on the left-hand side here, and we just put a representative example here. There's Salesforce, which is the granddaddy or the big daddy of, CRMs and Salesforce automation tools. Ugly as sin, but everybody uses it and it's never going to go away. So, it's a popular option because of that. Sugar, which is sort of a competitor to Salesforce, and the one that we just started using here at our end, which we really like, called ProsperWorks, which is a much simpler solution, but it lives within Gmail, which is where I spend 3/4 of my life anyway. So it tends to integrate really nicely with that and do a lot of cool things based on that. It's a startup in Silicon Valley. On the right-hand side, there's some of the social media management tools. Again, the big gorilla in the room there is HubSpot. It's expensive, but it does an incredible amount. You just need to work it like heck to get the value out of it. But once you've got it running, it can really, create a tremendously resourceful set of tools that can really help you engage with all sorts of different audiences. And then there's things like Sprout, and Hootsuite, which are stripped down, much more basic kind of tools, but they're still quite useful in helping you automate and manage your social activities. So it's good to have both sides covered here and have a CRM and a social media management tool in place. As far as where to go next, as you can see, we've sort of just scratched the surface here on user acquisition, and this is usually the area that people have the most questions on. So this is sort of a small subset of articles that I think might be useful next steps if you're kind of curious to learn more. The top left one there is a really good set of resources that Help Scout, which is a help desk software tool, put together, all about customer acquisition strategies. And there's a ton of really good links in there to other good sort of checklists and testing tools, that kind of thing. Same with the article on the right from Kissmetrics, 18 resources to help you become amazing at user acquisition, and then a couple of other little more focused tools down the bottom there on how to acquire customers from a startup guide, and then on the bottom right, how to calculate the cost of customer acquisition, which is always going to be an important element. It says they're in e-commerce, but it really applies to virtually every other kind of market opportunity as well. So I would encourage you, if you get the chance, to check those out. And again, I've got plenty more if you need some more reading material.
This is great, Peter. And just a reminder to those who joined us late that we will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow that's going to have a link to this deck. So you will be able to click directly on those links from that deck. So you don't need to jot those down quickly. If
yeah, right. And, yeah, the links are all there as well. So just let me know if none of them are working.
Okay.
So we're on the home stretch here, so I'm going to keep the pace up here and try and get this all done by 9:45 at Pacific time. So partner development is one area that tends to get neglected quite a bit. User acquisition is such a big element of most people's thought processes, but partner development can really help. Identifying good partners can really help with the heavy lifting of bringing customers onto your platform. So, it's really a factor of looking for synergistic products. If you're targeting consumers directly, it's just incredibly helpful to align yourself with partners that ideally can give you access to large numbers of potential customers. That could be channel partners that, offer to resell your solution, or they could even be like another app developer that shares a similar audience to you. And it could even be a celebrity. It's the Ashton Kutcher effect, as we call it. A lot of celebrities are looking to align themselves with emerging startups, just because it gives them an extra, element to their repertoire. And from the startup standpoint, sometimes getting a celebrity or a brand ambassador to align themselves with you can be a useful way of kickstarting user acquisition, because they can bring a social following with them, and their recommendation to their social followers can help drive users into the funnel. So looking for a similar user base, look at the track record of partnership deals that potential partner has, understanding whether they've already done some good deals that have proven to be mutually beneficial. And in some cases even look at a partner and say, could this be a company that at some point could even come in and acquire us, if that is part of your exit strategy. One of the big mistakes we see in this area as far as partnering is that kind of a lot of people think once the deal is done, the work's over, and that's definitely not the case. It's really a factor then of really starting to optimize those partnerships. And regardless of the type of partner, whether it's a channel distribution partner, or whether it's another app developer or a brand ambassador, it's really important to understand how that partner works, what their operation, how it's structured, what their team is like, and look to ways to leverage their existing internal and external communication channels so that you can find ways, whether it's through their blogs or whether it's through their training materials or their conferences, to go ahead and communicate out to their audiences why you are such a logical partner for that organization. And so you really need to sort of give them ongoing reasons to stay engaged and to stay as close to the front line with your partners as possible.
We have a question here from Dan.
Sure.
Dan wants to know, what would be kind of the first steps in identifying these complementary partners? Where can you find them?
Well, I think the first step is to sort of look at your user base, your customer base, whether that's, the people that you're projecting are going to be your customers or whether it's your existing customers, and then thinking through, going back to their profiles and saying, well, what else do these people do and where else do they hang out? And for instance, we had a client that has a very nice storage device that is a piece of hardware that is going to be, we think, very popular with sort of semi-professional photographers. Well, there's dozens and dozens of really cool apps out there that semi-professional photographers like to use, and a lot of those apps are looking for ways to differentiate themselves, and they're also looking for ways to get additional revenue streams for themselves. And a partnership with our client could do a lot of, a world of good for both parties, both for our client in being able to access the customer base for those app developers, and for the app developers to be able to offer something new as a differentiator to their customers as well. Mm-hmm. So it really starts with thinking through, the profiles of your customers and thinking through what else they do in the rest of their lives, and how you can, partner up with other organizations that have good engagement with them. So it goes a lot deeper than that, obviously, and it again, and I hate to make this sound like the standard disclaimer, it does vary a lot from opportunity to opportunity. Mm-hmm. It's usually a factor of sort of thinking through where your customers are hanging out online or what else they use, and sort of thinking of ways of aligning yourself with the existing parties that are already in that space.
That's great. That's helpful. Thank you, Peter.
Great. So meerkats, you can never go wrong with a meerkat. So I couldn't find a good image that really spoke about market leadership, so the meerkat is a little gratuitous. But the last section is about market leadership, and it's looking at how you can use some of the more traditional marketing approaches to supporting the stuff that we just spoken about, user acquisition and partner development. When I say sort of more traditional marketing, it's things like public relations, partnering up with industry associations. It's looking at the conferences and events within your particular marketplace. It's doing things like content syndication, where if you are creating content, making sure that there's plenty of good ways of getting that out into the outside world. It's working with analysts that cover your market space. And it's doing things like webinars and roadshows. And again, it's very difficult to cover all the bases here if you're a startup company, but it is good to sort of at least explore where you could get some mileage out of any kind of market leadership initiatives like this. As part of this, sort of mistake number 5 here, this is more of a general statement, I guess, is don't live in a bubble. I've seen, particularly amongst the big sort of startup communities, Silicon Valley, LA, New York, a certain tendency among certain entrepreneurs to just sort of smoke, breathe their own fumes, and it can be really tough, especially if you are sort of like an app developer where you're looking for mainstream market acceptance, to understand that the worlds that we live in sort of cool slick cities and on the West Coast and on the East Coast, it might be different from the mainstream. So I think it's really important when you're looking for a market leadership position to think about what that market is really like, and to think what leadership means from a broader perspective than just the tech community. So try and avoid living in the bubble if you can. We sort of sometimes have to go through the reality check ourselves. We think we're awfully clever about what we're putting together, then realize we're just kind of preaching to the choir. So it is always good to step back sometimes and kind of think through, what the rest of the world is thinking of your app or your audience or whatever.
On that note, we have a question from Ian here. He just wants to know your thought about sort of, user testing.
Yes, well, I realized as I was putting this together that the user testing aspect to this is a little light in this webinar. I do a separate webinar on user acquisition and testing, which goes into that in a fair amount of depth. But even in that one, to be honest with you, I'm not sure I do anything else other than scratch the surface. User testing is got to be a constant element for pretty much every startup, I mean, regardless of the audience. And there's a myriad of different ways of doing that. I've got actually a really good graph that shows the different approaches and how they are relevant for different types of audiences that I can send out to everybody as a follow-up. That'll probably do a better job than I can on this call of sort of explaining where the different approaches that you could take, and then how relevant they may be for your particular opportunity. But it is, and I'm glad you brought it up because it's an absolutely critical component. And like I say, I'm probably a little remiss in not focusing in a little more in this webinar on that.
Well, we'll just have to schedule a follow-up where we focus on that.
Yeah, well, my dad gave me two pieces of business advice. One was to never let a French person owe you money, and then the other one was leave them wanting more. So you have to put this one down to the latter.
Terrible.
Anyway,
Okay.
I'm running like a minute late here on my 45 minutes.
You're good. You're good. We're good.
Okay, good. In conclusion, the four areas that we focus on are the ones in the orange boxes here. When we send out like a letter of engagement or when we sort of start to work with a client, we're sort of usually looking at trying to balance out each of these four. And as you can see, this webinar is sort of focused in on these four areas alongside the getting organized part of it. But it's really all about branding, user customer acquisition, partner development, and industry leadership. And as I mentioned up front, some of those are going to be more relevant than others, depending on the market that you're focused on. But usually speaking, good startups that are really starting to hit their stride have got a strategy and good tactics in place for each one of those. So that's our job at our end of things here, is just to help clients get to that point as quickly and as effectively as possible. So that was sort of not a huge fanfare of trumpets at the end here, but the one thing that I always kind of draw people towards is to say, we'd love to go ahead and talk with you one-on-one. I use Calendly, which is a pretty slick scheduling service that you can go into and just schedule some time to chat or to meet. I'm based in Los Angeles. I'm up in the Bay Area on a fairly regular basis, and on the East Coast I have one client in New York, another one in DC, so I'm there once every 2 or 3 months. Most typically the first kind of point of engagement or first way to get things rolling is to just do a phone conversation. So feel free to go to calendly.com and put my name in, and you'll see some options there. Or obviously just feel free to email me directly. My email's there as well. In case you're wondering, the CMO.LA is sort of the startup and fast growth part of Mansfield and Associates. So we do have some corporate clients as well, like Cisco and some other big foundations that we work with. So we break out the startup stuff under CMO.LA. And that was about it from this end. I really appreciate all the really good questions, and I really appreciate you joining us on the call today. But I think I'm done.
Wow, I'm impressed by your time management. You are right on schedule. Talk about discipline.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, so we have a few questions here, which I'll toss out to you. And as I'm asking these, those on the line, if you have any questions, we do have time here to take those. You also see Peter's follow-up information, so you're welcome to follow up with him directly. But if you think it has general relevance for the whole audience, please feel free to ask those questions now to the group. So one question we have here from Marcus, you were saying about how, if you have this bright, shiny group of marketing people, you still shouldn't do everything. But what if you don't have that bright, shiny group? What if it's just you? So if you're a small company, you're the founder and you're trying to get the word out and acquire users, what are the top areas that you should be focusing on in with a lack of a full marketing team?
Well, I think it does come down to the fundamentals of looking at your customers and saying, okay, well, assuming that we don't have a lot of money or a lot of time or a lot of resources to dedicate to reaching out to them, let's learn as much as we can about who they are. And it could be that until you start to either raise money or generate revenue, that you need to be, take a lot of sort of guerrilla marketing or a guerrilla testing kind of an approach, where you might be looking, for instance, on LinkedIn for groups that are relevant to your target audience, and just starting to put, getting yourself involved in some of the discussion groups there. It could be that you take a very, very targeted approach to running some AdWords to understand your position, what keywords or what positioning and messaging that you can use to be, that's going to be most effective for you. It could be that you look at to other app developers around you or other peers around you to try and beg, steal, or borrow some target sort of pilot customers that you can run your app by or your solution by, so that it's not costing you a lot to go ahead and do paid search or any other kind of expensive marketing. So, depending on the audience, there are ways that you can start to at least build an understanding of what the key messaging areas are and what the sort of trigger points are for your target audiences that would allow you to then start to scale up a little as you either raise money or you do start to generate a little bit of revenue.
Right.
I'm not sure if that gives any insight, but again, probably a good one to take offline.
Sure, sure. And then this is probably, again, another one offline, but I think it has general relevance. Yes. Jules, wanted to know a little bit more about SEO and SEM. He's saying it's very easy to lose money fast when you invest in SEO, SEM if you don't have a lot of knowledge. Do you have any just general thoughts for, first of all, about what is the best use of paid advertising? Would it be Google AdWords, or would it be LinkedIn, or would it be Facebook, or boosting posts, or, just general thoughts around SEO, SEM? How not to waste money, how not to waste your marketing dollars.
Yeah, right. The good thing about this is that all of the channels that you just mentioned, it's relatively easy to go ahead and keep a tight hold on things. So, in the old days, if you wanted to run an ad in a newspaper or in a magazine or on TV, it would cost you, tens or hundreds or maybe even millions of dollars to do so. Now you can go onto Google AdWords and set, a budget of $50 a day and start to generate a little bit of attention for yourself, or at the very least start to generate a little bit of response to see which sort of marketing messages are going to be relevant. So it is an infinitely controllable mechanisms in place behind each of those channels. That the downside is that it's also infinitely controllable and manageable, and it's very challenging to stay on top of those and optimize that activity. Typically, even in situations where we're working with clients with very limited budgets, where there isn't a lot of money around to start bringing in lots of other consultants, the first area that we will look to bring in some specialized help in is exactly this, is paid search, SEO, SEM. And the good news is that there are some really, really good resources out there that we work with that are low cost, that have the mindset, which tends to be a bit of a weird one, but they do have the mindset to be able to optimize all different levels of sort of paid search and SEO, SEM types of programs. So it's tough to try and do it yourself, just because it's almost a full-time job just to stay on top of an AdWords program, even if you're not spending a lot of money. But the good news is that there are some, an increasing number of really good people out there that can help you with this sort of science of things in making sure that every dollar you spend is optimized.
Right. Great. And then we have a question here from Thomas on a different note. There's a lot of content in here around what we would consider traditional marketing tactics. And he's wondering, you hear a lot about growth hacking. So can you speak a little bit to growth hacking and compare and contrast, the level of success that you can expect to achieve from traditional marketing tactics versus something like growth hacking?
Yeah, that's a really good observation. I think growth hacking, I think, is done best by someone in-house, and I'm saying that as an external consultant to companies. We do give clients advice on ways to initiate a growth hacking program, but typically speaking, it's something that needs constant attention, and that usually works better as an in-house capability. So yeah, and I think the best programs are the ones that merge both, traditional marketing or some of the other, things like App Store optimization along with growth hacking. So it's probably a good one to take offline, just because growth hacking has so many different kind of aspects to it, some legal, some not. So it's probably something. It's probably a little more specific, and probably better if we take that one offline.
Sure. Okay, great. I think that brings us to the end of our hour here. Again, folks, if you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to Peter directly. You can schedule the one-on-one marketing session or just send him an email. And we'll be sending out this deck tomorrow, so you'll be able to review and check out some of those links. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I personally found it really useful and got some tips for our own marketing program. So I hope that everyone on the call felt that way as well. If you have follow-up questions that you want to ask to us too, or you want to make public on Twitter, you can just use our at Early Growth FS and at ManSF and use the hashtag Startup Marketing, and we can address them there in the public forum. Just a quick plug too, we have another webinar coming up on June 23rd is our next one, and that's going to be preparing for a pitch deck competition with Brian Rutberg, principal at 3C Communications. So I think that will be a really interesting one as well, and it will go beyond just pitch deck competition. It's useful for if you're presenting directly to investors, in a one-on-one setting as well. So please visit our events page to check that out or register for the event. And I think that is the end then. Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate your time, and I found this so informational, and thank you again.
Hey, well, thank you so much, and thank you all for attending.
Okay, take care. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.